Well, I've learned some very sad news. My favorite wrestling personality has finally lost his long battle with cancer and just the infirmities of old age and ill health. Bobby the Brain Heenan died today at the age of 73. And it was all the way back in 2002, 15 years ago, when Bobby the Brain Heenan announced that he had been diagnosed with throat cancer. And the treatments and surgeries that he underwent for the disease drastically changed his appearance. This is Bobby the Brain Heenan when he was healthy, but Bobby the Brain Heenan lost something like 45 or 50 pounds after the treatment, which required reconstruction of his jaw. His voice was a lot higher and softer, and then he had further more surgeries, and then he had a jaw infection, if memory serves me correctly, which nearly killed him, and which required the entire removal of the artificial jaw, and most of his mouth was removed. In 2012, I think it was, he was diagnosed with tongue cancer. And, I don't know if people know this, but when you undergo chemotherapy and different things like that, it can drastically weaken your bones. And over the last several years, he's had several falls and had broken bones, including his hip, and he become confined to a wheelchair. And just last year, he was hospitalized for a fall that led to broken bones. And today, September the 17th, I think it is, 2017, Bobby the Brain Heenan gave up the ghost, and he passed away. And like I said, he was my favorite wrestling personality. I remember back in the late 80s when he was the manager of Andre the Giant, WrestleMania 3, probably still, in my opinion, the most celebrated WrestleMania event and wrestling event of all time, when Hulk Hogan slammed Andre the Giant. According to Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant was like over 600 pounds at the time. And I remember Bobby the Brain Heenan, he was a manager, like I said, he was a manager of Andre the Giant. Later on, he was a manager of Mr. Perfect. He was a manager of Ric Flair when Ric Flair won the Royal Rumble back in, I think it was like 1992 or 93. Long time color commentator. I think if you watch wrestling in the early 1990s, although many people think that the premier WWE, or back then WWF, team was Vince McMahon and Jesse Ventura. They were, I think, the cream of the crop. But right under that, in my opinion, the era that I really started watching wrestling, it was Bobby the Brain Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon. I always remember Gorilla Monsoon always being the voice of reason and always telling the Weasel, Bobby, will you stop? Because it's sort of exasperated because Heenan was such a heel. But in reality, these two were great, great friends. And when Gorilla Monsoon passed away in October 1999, I remember Bobby the Brain Heenan insisted that he give a eulogy on the program toward Monsoon. Tony Schiavone did not want to acknowledge it, and you can tell because he had very little input on it. But I remember he said something about Gorilla Monsoon going to the pearly gates of heaven, and how the pearly gates of heaven be known as the gorilla position, which was a reference to the fact that oftentimes when matches were started in the backstage, Gorilla Monsoon would be positioned right outside on an angle or something like that. That was a reference to that. Oftentimes when the wrestlers would be coming out, you would see Gorilla Monsoon on the corner. But this is kind of hard, man. I really like Bobby the Brain Heenan. For all accounts, he was an excellent guy, man. Most people who play heels on in roles in television are actually the antithesis of what you see. They're usually really good people. And I remember he was there when WCW. It was him and Tony Schiavone, like I said. And they were there from Bash at the Beach back in '96, I think it was. They were there every Monday, every WCW Monday Night Nitro. It was must-see TV from '96 to about '99. And, it was the thing to watch, man. NWO. Hulk Hogan, Hulk Hogan at that time, I thought it was brilliant because Hulk Hogan he was this phenomenon in the very, very late 80s, very, very early 90s. But by that time, Hulk Hogan was starting to become almost a caricature of himself. And I think him going bad reinvented him. It also made him relevant. I mean, he was always going to be relevant, but it introduced him to a slightly younger fan base that kind of remember Hulk Hogan but didn't. And I remember when he came back, he was a lot smaller at that time. Hulk Hogan always had this kind of big, puffy kind of look, but he had got off the steroids and he had lost so much weight, and he looked better than me, and he looked younger than he had just 5-6 years earlier. But anyway, it was Hulk Hogan, Hollywood Hogan. You fans can stick it, brother. It was Hulk Hogan. You had Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. They were the original three. I think they ended up having too many people join NWO, but throughout it all, that, and, you had the Raven Flock. You had Goldberg come out later on. It was every Monday night. It was Bobby the Brain Heenan and Tony Schiavone. And Bobby Brain Heenan knew wrestling. He was wrestling. He is a true WWE legend. And now he's with Gorilla Monsoon, if you believe in that, at the pearly gates or the gorilla position. And the one thing I want to say that bothers me is I thought WWE could have done a lot more in helping this man out financially. Okay? If you aren't aware of how he looked and what he was going through, WWE could have done a lot more to help this man who helped to he had a significant part in putting WWE on the map in the late 80s. Well, really the entire 80s and 90s. Because some people forget that Bobby the Brain Heenan was a wrestler. Not a great wrestler, but he was a wrestler. But he really made his mark as a manager. He was very entertaining. He did not speak from a script like many of these guys do today. He was ad-libbing. And this is very hard to ad-lib. I mean, I've gotten a lot better at it, but I'm not anywhere near Bobby the Brain Heenan's league at ad-libbing. He came up with his own material, and a true legend has been lost today. Rest in peace, Bobby the Brain Heenan. I was going to end this video, but I just wanted to give a little bit more about Bobby the Brain Heenan. I'm seeing an article right here, and it's talking about how literally Bobby the Heenan perhaps was the greatest personality to ever grace professional wrestling. In addition to the people who I said he managed as far as the great legends, he also managed Big John Studd, the late Big John Studd, and King Kong Bundy. He had a tremendous wit, and Mean Gene Okerlund said this on his Facebook page, quote, "Saddened by the news that arrived this afternoon from Bobby Heenan's daughter Jess that he has passed. Bobby and his family have had to endure so much because of his health. Bobby Heenan was such a great friend. You don't replace people like that. Condolences to Cindy, Jessica, family, friends, and fans. Rest in peace, Bobby." And from Mick Foley, rest in peace, Bobby the Brain Heenan, one of the greatest and most influential personas our business has ever known. And Peter Rosenberg says Bobby Heenan, I guess he's referencing an exchange between Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon. Peter Rosenberg says, Bobby Heenan, quote, "I thought I was going to heaven till I saw your ugly mug, Monsoon, a gorilla. Will you stop?" And Bobby, "Good to see you, pal." So I guess that's what he thought. Maybe that's the exchange that, hypothetically, that Bobby the Brain Heenan is having right now with Gorilla Monsoon. But rest in peace, Bobby the Brain Heenan.